You won't believe what one neighborhood HOA decided was worth finding: a funeral. Yes, a funeral service. In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Sycamore Grove, most disputes with the HOA were the usual: lawns too long, trash cans left out overnight, maybe a mailbox the wrong shade of beige. But no one expected the board to target something so deeply personal, so profoundly human. It all began with the Martin family. After losing their grandmother, Evelyn, a gentle woman who had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 30 years, they decided to hold a small memorial service on their front lawn. Evelyn had loved her home, her garden, and her neighbors. It felt right to honor her life there, surrounded by the roses she planted decades ago. Friends and family gathered quietly, holding candles, sharing stories, and comforting one another. No loud music, no disruptions, just a heartfelt remembrance. But to the HOA president, Margaret Holloway, this was an unauthorized gathering. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the Martins' mailbox: a fine of $500 for violating HOA policies by holding an unapproved event. The family was stunned. The Martins weren't throwing a party, they weren't making noise past curfew, they were mourning. The fine felt like a slap in the face, an insult to Evelyn's memory. And when word spread, the neighborhood reacted with shock, then fury. A line had been crossed, and no one could quite believe the cruelty behind it. At first, the Martins thought it had to be a mistake. They went to the HOA office, letter in hand, hoping for a rational explanation. But Margaret, sitting behind her polished desk with her ever-present clipboard, didn't budge. "The rules are the rules," she said flatly. "All gatherings must be approved in advance. We can't make exceptions. If we let one event slide, everyone will want special treatment." The Martins left in disbelief. The service hadn't disrupted anyone, and neighbors had even joined in. It wasn't a party, it was a farewell. That's when the gossip began. Some neighbors whispered about how heartless Margaret was becoming. Others, fearful of the HOA's power, stayed quiet. But slowly, outrage grew. One of Evelyn's closest friends, a retired teacher named Linda Foster, spoke up at the next HOA meeting. Her voice shook with anger. "You find a grieving family for saying goodbye to their mother. That isn't governance, that's cruelty." The room erupted. Residents clapped, some shouted in agreement, while Margaret banged her gavel demanding order. But her composure cracked as more neighbors stood demanding the fine be revoked. Still, Margaret refused. "The rules exist for a reason. If you don't like them, perhaps this isn't the community for you," she snapped. That was the moment the neighborhood decided they wouldn't sit quietly. Evelyn's memory deserved better. The Martins deserved better. And the HOA needed to be taught a lesson. It began with a single gesture. The morning after the heated meeting, Linda placed a bouquet of fresh flowers on her front porch with a sign that read, "In memory of Evelyn Martin." By the end of the day, 2 more houses followed, then 5, then 10. Soon nearly every home on the street had candles, flowers, or small memorials glowing on their porches. At night, the neighborhood lit up with dozens of flickering lights, each one a symbol of defiance. It was peaceful, beautiful, and impossible to ignore. Margaret tried to fight back. She issued warning letters, threatening new fines for unapproved lawn displays. But the community only doubled down. Banners appeared, "We remember Evelyn." Children painted rocks with her name and left them on doorsteps. One neighbor even projected Evelyn's favorite hymn onto their garage door at sunset, drawing dozens of people into the street for a spontaneous sing-along. What started as a protest became something bigger, a movement. The neighborhood had never been so united. Families who barely spoke to each other before were now working together, arranging flowers, sharing candles, and supporting the Martins. Meanwhile, the HOA board fractured. Several members privately admitted to neighbors they disagreed with Margaret's stance but felt pressured to follow her lead. As the memorial displays grew, the board meetings turned into shouting matches, with Margaret desperately clinging to authority she no longer truly had. The louder she threatened, the more the community resisted. It was clear, Margaret had overplayed her hand, and Evelyn's memory had become the rallying cry for change. The breaking point came when Margaret, determined to restore order, hired a private security firm to patrol the neighborhood and remove memorials. But when the guards arrived, they found residents standing shoulder to shoulder in front of their homes, dozens of families, candles in hand, refusing to let anyone touch the tributes. The scene looked more like a peaceful vigil than a protest, and the guards, uncomfortable with the optics, refused to interfere. Word spread beyond Sycamore Grove. Photos of the glowing memorial-lined streets appeared on social media, then in local news. Headlines read, "HOA finds family for funeral, neighbors fight back." The story struck a nerve. Outrage poured in from across the country. Comment sections filled with support for the Martins and condemnation of the HOA's cruelty. Reporters camped outside the neighborhood, cameras rolling as the nightly candlelight tributes grew brighter and bigger. Under the glare of public scrutiny, Margaret's authority crumbled. Several HOA board members resigned, refusing to be associated with the scandal. Homeowners petitioned for her removal, and with overwhelming support, she was forced to step down. The Martins' fine was not only rescinded, but the community voted to create a permanent memorial garden in Evelyn's honor, a place for everyone in Sycamore Grove to gather, reflect, and remember. In the end, the HOA's attempt to control grief destroyed its own credibility. What was meant as punishment became the spark that united an entire neighborhood. Evelyn's legacy lived on, not just in her roses, but in the way her community stood together against injustice. And as the candles continued to burn, one truth became clear. Some rules aren't just unfair, they're inhuman. And when that happens, people will rise, not with anger alone, but with light.